Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from the US is Rebecca Sear. Hey, Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
By the way, did I pronounce your last name correctly there?
You did. You nailed it.
Very good. Very good. So Rebecca is an experienced agile coach and Scrum Master, passionate about helping teams deliver value through agile principles and practices while learning, growing, and having fun together. Connecting people through deft facilitation is her superpower, as is storytelling as the language of learning. And I'm really happy about that because we love stories here on the podcast. So why don't we start with one of those, Rebecca? Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Yeah, there's definitely a story. There's a bit of a premonition. So this is back when I was a project manager. I had a friend that I worked with, and I'm going to name him because he's no longer with us, Dave Kakuzzi, a wonderful friend and wonderful coworker. He was a developer and I was a project manager, and we used to work together quite a bit. We just worked well. And I was often, as a project manager, trying to assemble the same team and do all these things that I sort of later found out are a lot of kind of the values within agility. I was kind of trying to make them happen. But one day he read Jeff Sutherland's book and he gave it to me. And he was like, you have to read this. It's you. It's like your whole vibe. It's everything you believe in and kind of stand for. And as we'll talk about later, I'm not one to read work-related books very often, but I read it and I got what he said. I really did understand it. So about a year after that, my company had their agile transformation, which was kicked off by our CTO at the time. And he had this attitude, the phrase he would use is, we're burning the boats. We're going all in on agility. We're not going to quietly try little things. The PMO is now gone. If you were formerly a project manager, you are now available to be trained to either learn a product owner role or a Scrum Master role. And so in investigating those roles, I wanted to be a Scrum Master. I was trained for it. I got into it. I loved it. Pivoted from there into coaching and have done sort of a mix of the two things ever since, depending on the needs of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Because also being an agile coach or Scrum Master is all about adapting, right?
Yes.
Or would it not be one of the core values that we have in agile? Right. And as we adapt, we do that because sometimes we do screw up. I mean, to be honest, we all do. I do. And it's part of being human. And it's also part of wanting to help and wanting to, be out there and trying different things. So I don't know what kind of story you're going to tell us about next, but Rebecca, tell us a story of one of those difficult moments you had as a Scrum Master. We'll dive into the takeaways and lessons learned later, but tell us that story first.
Sure. Yeah, this was a comedy of errors, I think, and I learned a lot of things. And it was early in my Scrum Master journey. It was my first time at the company where I converted to a Scrum Master. This was the next company I went to. So I was coming in now as sort of a more experienced Scrum Master, and everybody was looking at me. I was assigned to a team. Well, so that organization was also going through their agile transformation. At the time that I joined, they had set up teams and really done nothing else. It was like, keep working as you're working, but now you have this solid team as opposed to a project group. And there was one team they wanted me to start with as the first Scrum Master because they were on sort of the highest profile, most important feature set. The situation with that team, they were a large team, and they never finished anything they took into a sprint. They were casually sprinting. Something I learned also when I joined that I would then, as an agile coach, reflect back on as oh, this was an error. They really never did in that organization any large scale training. So they kind of rolled out agile and were building Scrum teams. but their training was like a meeting that the CTO led where he talked about the concept of agility and I think maybe the concept of Scrum. I wasn't there to even see it, but there was no large scale training. And in retrospect, it was like, oh, you really needed to get people a little more level set before you kind of started asking for these things, like for them to sprint.
So kind of get the knowledge up, you mean, like get the kind of a
Yeah.
base of knowledge distributed across the
Yes.
organization.
Yes, because I think anything they were doing, such as sprinting, felt so arbitrary to them. It was like, I don't know why we're doing this. We've put this 2 week box around what we're doing. Who cares? And so, as a result of that lack of understanding, they were, and I'm air quoting, sprinting, but they weren't really committing to anything. They just had like a ton of work in, some going out. Their board was so full. They had so much work in flux at any given time. It was utter madness. And so when I joined as a Scrum Master, I thought, okay, job one, let me help them understand the value of focus and collaboration a little bit. And let's do a sprint planning where I can teach them sort of the why we would do that, and then help them to determine a sprint commitment that was a little more palatable and maybe give them that sense of achievement, right? Of actually getting it done if they were willing to take a swing with me. A couple things that were not in my favor. That team had a team manager who was upset at my hiring, upset at this whole agile
And you
thing
didn't know that
altogether.
yet at this time, right?
I didn't know that until after this planning meeting. So we did a planning meeting that was a little bit contentious. I would say half the team was on sides and half the team was frustrated. And what I had asked them to do, let's say there were 10 people on the team, I can't remember exactly. I had said, commit to no more than 10 stories. Already, they were the kind of team that used to each take a story and run away with it. There wasn't a lot of collaboration happening. I was ready to give that up. You each get to claim a story. But the agreement is you can't take any more stories into this sprint until all of them are through. That was kind of the agreement. So they kept saying, you're preventing us from doing work. And I was saying, no, I'm not. You can get through as much work as you can get through. I'm only asking for this rule to be respected, that we have to get this initial 10 through before you would add. And if you're capable, as you're saying, of doing 20 stories, then this should be no problem. We'll do 10 and then we'll do another 10 from there. So I sort of got them on sides with that. We finished the planning. I was immediately called into a meeting with their manager who really let me have it. So I would say lesson number one there was I probably didn't have all the context I needed, such as the opinion of their own manager, who I was now battling in this case. And we all know this is never going to help me. I'm not going to get
because the manager is always going to win, right? Because they have the power.
Exactly. So, learning number one, needed more context, needed to sort of understand what her baggage and background was with working in agile ways. And that probably would have informed maybe some different decision making on how I went forward. So as I continued to progress with that team and help them understand this, later when it came to the retrospective of this particular sprint, where they did not do as asked, they all took off with their 10 jobs. And then the minute someone finished one, they pulled in another. And so in the retro, I was trying to help them reflect on like what was painful about what I asked you to do and these kinds of things. And I elected to walk them through the penny exercise just to kind of help them.
What is the penny exercise? Tell us a little bit more.
The idea is that you're trying to show the team how much faster you can complete things as a group. So essentially, it's been a while since I've done it. So I feel like mess up the rules, but you have one person move a bunch of pennies around the room and you see that in 20 seconds, they were able to move 20 pennies or whatever. And then you have them collaborate in more of a assembly line fashion and you can get so many more through. And it's this idea that the more they collaborate, the quicker they can get things through, the more they can get through.
Yeah, so swarming, as some people call it.
Exactly.
Right?
I just wanted to introduce that as a concept in sort of a fun and silly way. Learning number two. They were not the kind of team that was up for fun and silly.
I can
So
imagine with
they
that kind of manager, it might be difficult to be up for fun and silly.
exactly. So they hated it. It fell really flat. And that was my own error. You know, I had some concerns going in about that, but I kind of thought I'd swing with it. It would sort of maybe this is I don't know. I don't know what I thought, but it didn't work. It didn't work. They got really angry. In fact, one particular person on the team who was the most difficult character by a wide margin had a full-on meltdown, stood up, started screaming at me, expressing that I shouldn't have been hired. Really offensive things were said, and we had to shut down the meeting and kind of walk away from it. Um, that was really bad. So then what I learned in terms of working with that particular person, you know, immediately there was concerns like people wanted to call in HR. There was some members of the team who I think felt maybe protective of me or had to watch someone scream at another person. Wanted to speak to HR, wanted some kind of offense to be written up. And I was kind of like, hang on, hang on, hang on. I think I just pushed someone past their limit and nobody wants to behave this way at work, and I need a minute to speak to him. So he and I ended up going on a walk maybe 2 days later and had a really good conversation where, you know, he said to me, that was a stupid activity, you knew that. And I said, well, no, surely you don't think that I went, what could be a terrible idea that I could bring in to try to teach them? Like, surely you don't really believe that I came in with my worst idea. What I do acknowledge is that I came in with an idea that fell flat. Like, yeah, it didn't work. Bad call. Bad call, Rebecca. I'll take that. But no, I need you to understand that I'm trying to do my best, as you are, as is everyone on this team. And so he and I really came to an agreement about sort of what my job is here and what I'm trying to do. And I understand that you have a tolerance and we need to be able to work together. You need to help me understand what your boundaries are and kind of what's working and what's not. And so he and I came up with some agreements sort of about our way of working, because he also acknowledged that him being sort of a linchpin in this was affecting the rest of the team, because there were people that were excited by what I was bringing to the table. But
I'm
of
pretty
course,
sure, I mean, the penny game can be quite motivating for many.
yes. And this particular guy was very skilled and very well respected. So to have kind of your top engineer not be on sides, how can any what are these junior engineers going to say, right? Like, how are they ever going to sort of be cool with anything I'm doing? So, you know, what I learned there was probably, again, more context and upfront work about understanding people's boundaries, developing some kind of a language for that, some kinds of working agreements about let's check in on tolerance more. Let's make sure that you feel safe and that you're walking into the context of something I want to try willingly. Like, we've got more consent built into our process.
So one thing from this story is, I mean, we never know how much context is enough, right? I mean,
Right.
you really only see when that something falls flat, when it falls flat, especially if it has succeeded in the past.
Right.
So I don't think we can necessarily know how much context we need. I mean, of course we can, you know, basic things, obviously, like, you know, where's the manager at? I think that's a good question for us to
Uh-huh.
ask ourselves, and I think that's very useful. But one thing that you said that we can always make sure happens before we take the team towards maybe stretching their limit, using the words that you were just mentioning, I think would be, who do I have in this team that I absolutely must have on my side before I take a chance?
Right. Yep.
And of course, in that case, it's that top engineer that you were referring to. But very often there are people who are very influential in the teams we work with. And
Mm-hmm.
if we don't bring them on our side, we might be creating a conflict that is very hard to get out of.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to me, that really built, I have come to really value consent when I'm coaching anyone. whether it's an in-team coach working as a Scrum Master or working more at the enterprise level, consent matters, and it matters for building trust, which is something you need to try to build as quickly as you can. And when people feel like they have some choice in the matter or that you care for what their boundaries are and you're trying to respect them, I find that pays off so significantly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that story, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.